The villagers froze as the towering elephant stepped into the clearing, its massive shadow stretching across the dusty ground. It didn't trumpet or charge. Instead, it walked straight toward the young woman standing at the center of the crowd, its eyes filled with something far deeper than anger or fear. For a moment, no one breathed. I felt my chest tighten, unsure whether this was a plea or a warning. The elephant lowered its head, stopping just inches from her, as if searching for something it had lost long ago. And in that silence, I realized this meeting wasn't a coincidence. Leela grew up in a quiet village nestled at the edge of a vast savanna, a place where the horizon felt endless and the rhythms of life moved with the rise and fall of the sun. Most families lived in small clay homes arranged around a central clearing where children played and elders shared stories of the land. Leela, barely 10 years old at the time, was known for wandering beyond the safe paths, chasing birds, collecting stones, and following animal tracks with a curiosity far too large for her small frame. Her parents often worried, but they also understood that her heart was tied to the wilderness in a way neither of them could tame. From an early age, she formed a quiet bond with the wildlife surrounding the village. Herds of gazelles passed like whispers in the dawn. Hyenas laughed under the moonlight, and elephants sometimes marched in the distance, their silhouettes rising like ancient guardians. To Layla, they weren't just animals, they were neighbors, beings with stories, fears, and families of their own. She watched them with a sense of reverence that most adults had forgotten. And perhaps that was why the world seemed to respond to her differently, as though it recognized the gentleness she carried. Her village thrived on simple routines: morning water trips, afternoon harvests, and evening gatherings lit by fire. Though resources were modest, warmth and unity tied the community together. Children learned early to respect the land, and the land, in return, sustained them. Still, there were challenges. Unpredictable seasons brought sudden storms or harsh droughts, forcing the villagers to adapt constantly. Survival here meant resilience, and resilience became woven into Lila's character long before she understood the word. She spent hours sitting beneath the shade of an acacia tree, sketching animals on scraps of paper. Sometimes she imagined speaking to them, asking what they feared or hoped for, and whenever she watched a mother elephant shepherd her calf, something in her stirred, a quiet admiration she could never fully explain. I often wondered how such a young soul could feel the world so deeply. It was as if she sensed every heartbeat around her. On the day everything changed, the sky glowed with a strange metallic light, the air thick with the smell of rain that never came. Lila was wandering near the shallow marshes at the village's edge, humming a tune she'd learned from her father. She paused when she noticed broken reeds, deep tracks stamped into the mud, and an unusual stillness settling over the landscape. Something wasn't right. A heaviness pressed into her chest, the kind that comes before a storm or a discovery too big for a child to face alone. That moment made me wonder how often life nudges us toward the stories meant to shape us, even before we recognize the path beneath our feet. Layla stepped cautiously through the marshland, her sandals sinking into the damp earth with each uncertain stride. The sky had dimmed, even though the sun still hung above the horizon, casting a muted haze over the landscape. The reeds rustled softly as a warm breeze brushed past, but beneath that gentle music was another sound, faint, trembling, and unlike anything she had heard before. She froze, straining her ears. There it was again, a muffled cry that wavered between desperation and exhaustion. It sent a shiver along her spine. She pushed through the tall grass, her heart thudding faster with every step. The ground became softer, the air heavier. Then the land opened into a wide, muddy pit where rainwater had once collected earlier in the season. At first, she saw nothing but churned earth and murky pools. But then, through the haze and shadows, she saw movement, a small, struggling shape buried up to its belly in thick, suffocating mud. It was an elephant calf, no more than a few months old, its tiny frame trembling violently as it tried to lift itself. The calf let out a strained trumpet, its trunk barely rising above the mud before collapsing again. The sound cracked like heartbreak across the silent marsh. Lila gasped, clamping a hand over her mouth as she stumbled closer. The calf's eyes were wide with panic, glazed with exhaustion, and coated in streaks of mud that clung to its eyelashes. Its legs kicked helplessly, each motion only sinking it deeper. The more Lila watched, the more she felt the air thicken with urgency. She scanned the horizon, half expecting to see a massive silhouette, its mother, charging toward her. Everyone in the village knew the danger of getting between an elephant and her calf. But the landscape remained empty, a lonely stretch of grass and distant hills. That isolation made the moment even more terrifying. Where was the mother? Why was the calf alone? The pit had steep edges that sloped inward, making escape nearly impossible. Lila moved closer, testing the ground with her foot. The mud swallowed her sandal instantly, forcing her to yank it free. She dropped to her knees at the edge and reached out her arms, though the calf was still too far. The little elephant cried again, a thin, wavering plea that seemed to slice straight into her. She felt her throat tighten painfully, the sheer helplessness of the creature nearly too much to bear. Seeing it struggle, I felt a sharp ache, like witnessing the world fail something innocent in real time. Lila knew she had to act, yet fear tangled itself around her ribs. Her parents had warned her countless times, never approach a trapped animal, especially something as powerful as an elephant. But the calf's movements were growing weaker, its breaths coming in short, trembling bursts. Mud oozed around its chest and threatened to creep toward its head. If she ran back to the village, precious minutes would slip away. By then, the calf might be still. She swallowed her fear and crawled closer, flattening herself on her stomach to distribute her weight. The mud sucked greedily at her hands as she stretched her fingertips toward the calf's slick skin. "It's okay," she whispered, though her voice trembled. "I'm here. I'm not leaving you." The calf blinked slowly, its distressed breathing rattling like a loose drum. It extended its trunk weakly in her direction, brushing her wrist. The touch was warm, shaking, and heartbreakingly gentle for a creature caught in such violent fear. Lila felt a surge of determination ignite within her. She reached farther, managing to grip the top of its foreleg, where the mud had not yet swallowed it completely. But the suction was intense, pulling back against her efforts as though the earth itself refused to let go. She dug her heels into the ground and pulled with all her strength. The calf let out a groan, its legs kicking in instinctive panic. Mud splattered across her arms and face, but she held on, refusing to release her grip even as her muscles screamed in protest. She leaned back, pulling harder. digging her feet deeper into the soil. The calf shifted slightly, only an inch, but enough to give her hope. She tried again, this time calling out for help, even though she knew no one was within earshot. Her voice echoed across the marshland, swallowed by the wind. She repositioned herself and reached for the calf's trunk, encouraging it to wrap around her arm. The calf complied weakly, its desperate instinct guiding it. The small tug it offered, frail as it was, became a silent plea for her not to give up. The mud around them churned more violently with every attempt. For a terrifying moment, she thought the ground beneath her might collapse and drag her down too. She scrambled backward, panting, her body shaking with fatigue and fear. The calf whimpered, its eyes half closed now, its strength nearly drained. The sight cut into her deeper than anything she had felt before. She pressed a muddy hand to her chest, trying to steady her breath. She had never been responsible for another life before, and now here she was, facing the possibility that she might lose one right in front of her. She rose to her feet and scanned the distance again. The village was far but not unreachable. She could run back. She could call for the adults. She could return with ropes and arms strong enough to fight the mud. But every second she spent deciding was another second the calf sank deeper. She sensed time slipping through her fingers like water. In that moment, she realized that life doesn't always give us choices we feel ready for. Sometimes it simply demands that we act. She turned and sprinted toward the village, mud flying from her feet, her breath ragged and burning. Behind her, the calf let out one last trembling call, a sound that echoed not just through the marshland, but deep inside her own heart. That echo stayed with her, heavy and urgent, pushing her faster than she had ever run, and it made me wonder how a single cry for help can shape the course of someone's life long before they understand the weight of answering it. By the time Lila reached the village, her legs were trembling and her breath tore painfully at her lungs. Mud streaked her arms, her face, even her hair, but she didn't stop to explain. She burst into the central clearing, shouting for help, her voice cracking with urgency. At first, the adults stared in confusion, but when she managed to gasp out the words "elephant calf" and "trapped," their expressions shifted instantly. A trapped calf meant danger. It meant the mother might be nearby. It meant risk. But it also meant a life was slipping away at that very moment. Within minutes, a small group of villagers gathered ropes, wooden planks, and long poles. Lila led them back toward the marsh, her feet slipping across the uneven ground as adrenaline pushed her forward. She prayed silently the calf was still alive, that her decision to leave hadn't cost it the fragile time it had left. When they reached the pit, the sight waiting for them was far worse than before. The calf had sunk deeper, its belly now fully swallowed by the mud. Only its back, trunk, and the tips of its ears remained above the thick surface. Its cries were weaker, barely audible tremors of sound that carried the weight of despair. One of the men muttered under his breath that they might be too late. Lila ignored him. She slid to the edge of the pit again and called the calf's name, not because it had one, but because she needed it to know she had returned. The calf lifted its trunk sluggishly toward her, a gesture so faint yet so full of trust that her eyes stung. She reached out, brushing the damp, trembling skin. That small touch nearly broke her. It felt like the last flicker of hope clinging to her fingertips. Seeing it fight for breath, I felt a heaviness settle in my chest, a sharp reminder of how fragile survival can be when the world decides to turn against something defenseless. The villagers worked quickly, driving wooden planks into the mud to create a makeshift platform. Two men tied ropes into loops while others tested the soil, searching for firm ground to anchor themselves. Lila refused to step aside. She held one of the ropes, insisting she could help guide it around the calf. No one had the heart to deny her. They tossed the first loop toward the calf, but it slid uselessly across the mud. A second attempt landed closer. Lila crawled forward on her stomach again, ignoring the shouts warning her not to get too close. She grabbed the rope, her fingers sinking into the sticky sludge, and managed to pull it around the calf's front leg. The calf groaned, exhausted but compliant. Once the rope was secured, several villagers took their positions, bracing themselves against nearby roots and rocks. The leader called out a count. On three, they pulled. The strain was immediate and brutal. The rope tightened, the mud resisted, and the calf let out a sound that was part pain, part fear. The villagers slipped, cursed, reset their footing, and pulled again. Inch by inch, the calf rose, its body emerging from the earth like a creature fighting its way out of a nightmare. Lila encouraged it softly, her voice shaking. She placed a hand on its trunk again, letting it wrap around her wrist as if that small contact could anchor it to life. The calf's grip was weak, but intentional. It stirred something fierce inside her, a promise that she would not let go, no matter how hard the mud fought back. The villagers pulled harder, their muscles trembling under the weight. The rope creaked, the mud gurgled, and the shallow pit vibrated with the struggle. Sweat poured down their faces. Lila could feel the tension in the air. One wrong move, and the rope might snap, throwing them all into the pit. But no one stopped. Finally, the calf's front legs broke free from the mud with a loud suction pop that made several villagers stumble backward. Encouraged, they pulled again, fueled by the sudden shift. The calf thrashed weakly, trying to help, though its strength was nearly spent. With each pull, the mud released another portion of its body until at last the calf slid forward onto the makeshift platform with a heavy, trembling thud. The villagers collapsed to their knees, panting. Lila scrambled toward the calf, brushing mud away from its eyes and ears. It lay there for a long moment, its chest heaving in deep, uneven breaths. Then slowly, it tried to stand. Its legs wobbled violently beneath its weight. Lila steadied it with both hands, though her small frame could hardly hold it. The calf's forehead pressed weakly against her shoulder. She closed her eyes, overcome by relief. Seeing it lean into her like that, I felt an unexpected warmth, proof that even in its fear, it recognized the compassion offered to it. With the villagers' help, the calf finally managed to rise. It took a few shaky steps, nearly falling twice. But after several attempts, it stood upright, swaying but alive. Alive. Lila exhaled a breath she didn't know she had been holding. When they guided it toward solid ground, the calf paused at the edge of the clearing. It turned back toward Lila, its large dark eyes locking onto hers. It held her gaze for several seconds, an expression that seemed almost human in its gratitude, before slowly backing away into the tall reeds. It disappeared into the wilderness with a soft rustle, leaving the marshland quiet once more. That moment lingered in the air, and it made me wonder how a single act of courage can tether two different lives together long before either understands the bond being formed. 5 years passed, marked by seasons that grew harsher and more unpredictable with each cycle. The village that had once thrived in gentle harmony with the land now faced challenges that weighed heavily on every family. Rainfall became scarce, arriving late or not at all. Crops wilted under the relentless sun, and the river that had been the village's lifeline shrank into a narrow stream, its cracked banks revealing how fragile life here truly was. Lila had grown into a young teenager, taller, steadier, and quieter in ways that came from living alongside hardship. The carefree girl who once chased butterflies now spent her mornings helping her parents search for water sources, often walking miles under the blistering heat. Her skin darkened beneath the sun, her shoulders grew stronger, and her spirit sharpened with maturity far beyond her years. Still, there remained a softness in her gaze, an echo of the child who had once knelt in the mud to save a helpless calf. Even now she often wondered what had become of that young elephant. She would sometimes pause during her long treks, scanning the distant horizon in hopes of seeing a familiar silhouette. But the savannah was vast and unforgiving, and sightings of elephants had become rare. Many believed the herds had migrated due to drought. Others whispered darker possibilities about poachers, about starvation, about nature's cruel unpredictability. Lila tried not to dwell on those thoughts, though they sometimes crept into her dreams. The village struggled more each year. Wells dried, livestock weakened. The elders met frequently to discuss rationing, searching for solutions that always seemed temporary. People who once laughed freely now carried worry lines etched deep into their faces. Yet, despite the growing weight pressing down on the community, no one gave up. They worked together, sharing resources, offering help, and leaning on one another through the worst days. Resilience had long been their quiet inheritance. Lila helped wherever she could, hauling water, tending to gardens, soothing anxious livestock, and listening to the elders' advice. But privately, she carried her own fear that the land she loved so deeply was slipping away, drying into something unfamiliar and brittle. One afternoon, after hours of failed attempts to coax crops back to life, she sat beneath the familiar acacia tree at the village's edge. The same tree where she used to sketch animals. The same tree where she had once first seen the tiny tracks that led her to the calf. She traced her fingers over the dried earth, remembering the weight of the young elephant's trunk around her wrist. That memory, though 5 years old, pulsed with warmth as if it had happened yesterday. She wondered if the elephant, wherever it was, remembered her too. That small gesture of trust had changed something in her, had made her firmly believe that kindness, even in small moments, never truly disappeared. Thinking about that calf struggling in the mud, I felt a familiar tightening in my chest. How fragile beginnings can shape us long after the moment has passed. One evening, just as the sun dipped into a haze of gold and crimson, a distant rumble vibrated through the air. The ground trembled faintly beneath Lila's feet. She looked up, scanning the fields with narrowed eyes. The villagers paused too, exchanging uneasy glances. Thunder had not visited their land in months, and the sky above was cloudless. The rumble grew louder, steady, rhythmic, purposeful. Lila's heart quickened. She stepped forward, her breath catching as a long shadow stretched across the horizon. Something was approaching the village, something massive, something that moved with a familiar weight. The villagers gathered in the clearing, unsure whether to run or brace themselves. And as the shape grew clearer, towering and unmistakable, Lila felt the world tilt for just a moment. It made me wonder how the past finds its way back to us, sometimes quietly, sometimes thunderously, when we least expect it. The rumble intensified as the figure on the horizon grew larger, its outline rising like a moving mountain against the fading light. At first, the villagers whispered nervously, unsure if they were witnessing danger or something far more mysterious. Livestock scattered, birds erupted from nearby trees, and dust curled upward with every heavy step approaching the edge of the village. Lila felt her pulse hammering in her throat, her feet rooted in place as if the earth itself held her still. Then the silhouette stepped fully into view, a massive bull elephant, towering above anything she had ever seen up close. His tusks curved like pale crescents, thick and sharp, glinting beneath the setting sun. Deep creases lined his weathered skin, each wrinkle a testament to years spent battling wilderness and time. Yet his gaze, when it shifted toward the villagers, was not wild rage or territorial challenge. It was something steadier, quieter, almost searching. The villagers collectively stepped back, gripping tools, ropes, anything they could use to defend themselves if the situation turned dangerous. Several elders murmured warnings. A bull elephant approaching a human settlement unprovoked was never a simple matter. But Lila didn't move. Her breath caught as she studied the animal's eyes, dark, familiar, and filled with a depth she couldn't quite place. He stopped at the boundary of the clearing as if he understood the invisible line separating village from wild. His ears flapped once, slow and deliberate. A deep rumble vibrated through his chest, not aggressive, but resonant. A call, a message, perhaps even a memory. Lila felt the sound settle into her bones. She took a hesitant step forward. Faces around her tightened in fear. "Lila, stay back," someone whispered urgently. But something deep within her pulled her toward him. She didn't know if it was recognition or instinct, but the emotion rising in her chest was too strong to ignore. She stepped closer, her heart trembling. The elephant's massive head tilted ever so slightly, the way someone might lean in to see an old photograph more clearly. She stopped only a few feet away, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his massive body. For a moment, everything fell silent. The villagers, the wind, even her own breath seemed to pause. The elephant lowered his head, bringing his gaze level with hers. And in that moment, the world snapped sharply into focus. A feeling washed over her, a sudden, overwhelming certainty. She knew those eyes. She knew that quiet depth, that searching sadness, that steady warmth. This was the calf, the one she had pulled from the mud 5 years ago. He had returned. Seeing those eyes lock onto hers, I felt something tighten deep inside me, a reminder of how fiercely memories can cling to the heart, even across years and miles. The elephant extended his trunk slowly, as if asking permission. Lila lifted her hand, letting his trunk gently brush across her palm. The touch was careful, almost fragile, as though he feared breaking something delicate. Those few seconds stretched endlessly, charged with emotion none of the villagers could fully understand. A murmur swept through the crowd. Shock, disbelief, awe. No one spoke loudly. They were witnessing a reunion that defied instinct, nature, and logic. The elders exchanged glances, unable to explain what they were seeing. Elephants were intelligent, yes, but remembering a single human after so many years and approaching her without aggression was something none of them had ever experienced. The bull elephant stepped back a few paces, turning slightly toward the open plains beyond the village. He rumbled again, deeper this time, then looked over his shoulder as if beckoning her. Lila's brows furrowed. He wasn't just visiting, he wanted her to follow. A few villagers protested immediately. "No, Lila, you can't go out there with him. Bull elephants are unpredictable. It might be a trap. Where's the rest of the herd?" But Lila's intuition had always been stronger than her fear. She placed a hand over her chest, steadying her breath. She didn't know what awaited beyond the tall grass, but she sensed the elephant wasn't leading her toward danger. His movements lacked aggression. His eyes held only recognition and a strange urgency. The elephant took several steps, then paused, turning back toward her once more. His trunk lifted, gesturing subtly to the horizon. That small motion carried weight, like a plea only she could understand. After a long moment, Lila stepped forward. "I'm going with him," she said quietly. Several villagers reached for her, others cried out in disbelief, but no one could stop her. Something in her voice, steady, resolute, made them hesitate. The elephant waited until she approached, then turned and walked ahead, his massive form carving a path through the savanna grass. Lila followed close behind, her footsteps quick but sure. As they left the village boundary, a few brave villagers trailed at a distance, unwilling to let her journey alone. The sun dipped lower, draping the land in amber hues. The elephant's back glowed like burnished copper beneath the fading light, and the air filled with the whisper of insects rising with the night. They walked for nearly an hour. Lila didn't ask where they were going. The elephant knew the land far better than she ever could. The villagers kept their distance, muttering anxiously as shadows deepened around them. The deeper they traveled, the clearer it became that the elephant was leading them with intention. Eventually, the elephant stopped at a dry, cracked expanse of earth surrounded by brittle shrubs. There was nothing remarkable about the place. No water, no shelter, no signs of recent life, just desolation. Lila stepped beside him, puzzled. The elephant rumbled loudly, a sound that rolled across the barren land. He lifted a front foot and stomped hard. Dust rose. He stomped again. Lila knelt, placing her ear close to the ground. At first, she heard nothing, just silence and the faint rustle of distant grass. Then, there it was, a faint, hollow echo beneath the earth, as if something hidden waited just below the surface. Her breath caught. This land wasn't empty. It was holding something beneath. When I heard her describe that moment, I felt a chill. It was as if the ground itself carried a secret only he had the strength to reveal. The elephant stepped back, giving space, then tilted his head toward her and the villagers behind them, urging them to understand. And in that quiet, Lila realized he hadn't returned for himself. He had returned for them. It made me wonder how often the ones we save end up saving us in ways we never expect. The villagers stood in uneasy silence as the massive elephant stomped again, sending cracks trembling through the dry surface. Dust lifted in thin clouds, drifting into the cooling evening air. Lila knelt beside him, pressing her ear to the ground once more. The hollow echo was unmistakable now, a muted resonance that vibrated under her palms. Something beneath the earth waited to be uncovered. She rose quickly, turning to the villagers with wide, urgent eyes. "There's water under here," she said, breathless. "Deep, but close enough to reach." A ripple of shock swept across the group. The land they stood on had been dismissed long ago, declared barren, lifeless, a graveyard of shattered hopes. For years, the village had searched for new water sources, always without success. Yet here was a creature of the wild, pointing them to what human effort had failed to find. The elephant stepped forward and dug his tusks into the hardened earth, scraping away layers of dry soil. The sound echoed sharp and deliberate across the plains. He swung his trunk, clearing loose debris, then stomped again, widening the fractures spreading across the ground. Lila watched, mesmerized, as his strength carved into the land with a purpose that felt almost sacred. The villagers exchanged hesitant glances before grabbing shovels and tools. Though uncertainty lingered in their minds, something about the elephant's conviction stirred them. One by one, they stepped forward and began digging alongside him. The ground fought them at first, unyielding and heavy, but with each layer removed, the earth softened slightly, as if responding to the combined effort. The elephant worked tirelessly, his breaths loud and rhythmic, dust clinging to the ridges of his skin. Lila dug beside him, her hands blistering, her arms trembling from the strain, but she didn't stop. None of them did. The air filled with the scrape of metal, the thud of tusks, and the pounding of determined footsteps. Minutes slipped into hours. The sun vanished completely, leaving the world bathed in starlight. Torches glowed in trembling halos as villagers illuminated the widening pit. Sweat mixed with dust on their faces, their muscles burned, but hope, real, tangible hope, began to pulse through the group like a heartbeat. Then, as the elephant drove his tusks deep one more time, a low resonant crack echoed beneath them. A villager gasped. Another stepped back. The ground gave a soft sigh, releasing a faint puff of cool air. Lila felt her breath hitch, her pulse racing. The elephant stomped once more, and this time the earth answered. A thin, glistening bead of water seeped up through the cracked soil. Gasps erupted. Someone fell to their knees in disbelief. The bead swelled into a trickle, the trickle into a small bubbling spring. Mud churned, darkening with moisture, and within moments water began to pool, fresh, clear, unmistakably alive. Seeing that first shimmer of water, I felt my throat tighten with the kind of hope that arrives when you're standing at the edge of giving up. Villagers broke into cries, some of joy, some of pure relief. Mothers lifted their children so they could see. Elders stared in stunned silence, tears running down their cheeks. Men who had not smiled in months laughed aloud, unrestrained. Water, a miracle they had prayed for, was blooming right beneath their feet. The elephant stepped aside, watching the chaos unfold with a stillness that felt knowing. Lila approached him slowly, her eyes shining with tears. She reached up and laid her hand on his trunk, the same way she had 5 years earlier. The elephant lowered his head, pressing his forehead gently against hers. It was a gesture so full of tenderness and understanding that several villagers turned away to hide their tears. "He remembered," someone whispered behind her. "All these years, he remembered her kindness." The truth of it settled over the group like a warm blanket. This was not a coincidence, not instinct, not chance. This was gratitude, deep, enduring, and powerful enough to bring a creature across miles of wilderness back to the one who had saved him. Lila leaned against the elephant's massive form, feeling his breath rise and fall. She had saved his life once. Today, he had saved an entire village. The symmetry of it wrapped around her heart like a gentle, unbreakable thread. The spring continued to swell, forming a shallow pool that reflected the torchlight. Villagers worked quickly to widen it, shaping channels to direct the flow toward their fields. Hope spread through them with every new ripple of water. Above them, the night sky glittered with countless stars, as if the universe itself had paused to witness the moment. Watching it all unfold, it made me wonder how acts of compassion ripple outward. Quiet at first, then powerful enough to reshape the world in ways we never expect. In the days that followed, the spring the elephant had uncovered continued to swell, feeding shallow streams that wound through the fields like silver threads. The village, once on the brink of collapse, now pulsed with renewed life. Children filled their clay jars with clear water, laughing as it splashed over the rims. Farmers returned to their plots, their hands finally working soil that no longer crumbled into dust. Hope, once fragile and scarce, now flowed as steadily as the water itself. Lila spent much of her time near the spring, watching the water carve new paths through the land. Each morning she found villagers gathered there, some praying, some simply sitting in silence, grateful for the miracle they had witnessed. They spoke of the elephant in hushed, reverent tones, as though he were a guardian spirit who had stepped out of legend, and in a way, he was. The elephant lingered at the outskirts of the village for several days, never entering, but always watching. He stood beneath the acacia trees, his massive form blending with the rugged landscape. At times, Lila approached him, offering fruits or simply resting beside him in quiet companionship. He responded with gentle rumblings, his trunk brushing her arm with the familiarity of an old friend. Their bond, forged in mud and fear years earlier, had deepened into something that felt ancient. One morning, as the sun climbed over the horizon in soft gold, Lila found him standing alone near the far edge of the clearing. His posture was different, still gentle, but resolved. She walked toward him with a heaviness she couldn't explain, as though she already knew what he had come to tell her. He lowered his head when she reached him, and she placed her hands on either side of his trunk. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The world around them seemed to fade, leaving only the quiet space between girl and elephant. "I'll never forget you," she whispered. His chest vibrated with a low rumble, one that felt like acknowledgment or farewell. Seeing them stand like that, I felt a pang. It was the kind of goodbye that doesn't need words to be understood. The elephant stepped back. He looked at her one more time, his gaze holding that deep, steady warmth she had first seen in a pit of mud. Then he turned toward the open plains. With slow, powerful steps, he walked away, moving through the tall grass until the earth swallowed his silhouette. Lila stayed rooted in place long after he vanished, her heart full yet aching. The villagers joined her eventually, but no one spoke. They all understood some bonds are meant to be honored quietly. Life in the village transformed in the months that followed. The new spring allowed crops to flourish again, and herds regained their strength. Leela continued helping her community, but something within her had shifted. The elephant's return and the gift he left behind ignited a purpose she could no longer ignore. She spent her days learning from elders about conservation, tracking, and the delicate balance between humans and wildlife. She dreamed of protecting creatures like him, creatures whose intelligence and compassion were far deeper than most people realized. Years later, Lila would look back on that season of her life as the moment her path truly began. And thinking about it now, it made me reflect on how goodbyes aren't always endings. Sometimes they're quiet beginnings in disguise. But what lingered most was the lesson the elephant had left her with. Kindness echoes. Across years, across distance, across species, the smallest act, a hand reaching into the mud, can return in ways that reshape entire worlds. And maybe that's why, every time I think about their story, I'm reminded of something simple yet unshakably true. The things we give from the heart never really disappear. They find their way back to us one way or another. Perhaps that's the message that stays with me the most. Kindness doesn't just save others. It gently teaches us who we are meant to become.